404, that is West Africa under colonial rule. Now this course we need to expedite because I don't know whether we have. Yeah, this is the first meeting. Uh, so that is West Africa under colonial rule. So as the name implies, we are going to walk you through the period that the whole West Africa came under colonial rule. And as you may recall, all the countries in Africa, except only two, that is Liberia and Ethiopia. Yeah, these two were the only countries that did not come under colonial rule, all others. And therefore, we are going to examine the effects of colonial rule on West Africa. So the people, how did colonialism affect them? We need to look at it, the multifarious processes of decolonization. Now, in their struggle for independence, that's what we mean by decolonization. So look at the processes and the prospects and emergent challenges of the social, economic, and political developments or changes that came with it. We look at that. And so at the end of the course, we expect that you should be able to identify the political, economic, and social positions of West Africa on the eve of the colonial conquest. And again, look at the reasons or factors responsible for the European partition. So why did they scramble for and partition African countries or West African countries? We look at that, and especially the Berlin Conference, what motivated the conference that took place in Berlin, led by Otto von Bismarck. And again, we look at West Africans' involvement in the First and Second World Wars, and also look at the socio-economic and political effects of colonial rule on West Africa. So how did the people also respond? Their response to colonial rule. Now, the main topic that we shall look at, we'll look at West Africa on the eve of colonial conquest. So look at that one. Then look at the scramble for partition of Africa. So we'll also look at the Berlin Conference and its impact, how the Berlin Conference affects. So look at that one. And then West African responses to the European partition. When the European colonized African countries, did the people sit on the fence? What did they do? We need to have an idea about what the people did. So look at that. And then West African nationalism and decolonization. So nationalism, which is very important, an assault to overthrow colonialism or colonialism, as you may call it. And so that is look at nationalism and decolonization. In other words, nationalism and independence. So look at that one. And of course, the impact of colonial rule on the people of West Africa. So the effects of colonial rule, which we shall have to look at it. As for the assessment, we are already conversant with it. We will be doing 40% assessment and 60% end of semester exams. There are some references of bibliography that you have to go through when you get the course outline to supplement what we give you. But after the slides, I think that's what I use in setting my questions. So you need to be conversant with the slides, my lecture slides. Okay, so and that after that, let me share the first topic. There's no time. Yeah, let's look at this one. Yeah, so the scramble for and partition of Africa. Let's walk you through. I'll be speaking to the things. I'm not going to read, so you pay attention. And if you have any question that you may ask, yeah, I'll be speaking to what I have here. As I have already mentioned, from the 1880 onwards, only a few areas of Africa had been engulfed under British colonial rule. So now, such areas including southern Ghana, the colony, and the protectorate. Don't forget that after the defeat of Asante in 1874 by the British colonized, the what became known as the Crown Colony. In other words, the Western Province, the Eastern Province, and the Central Province. So these provinces were annexed in 1874 by the British. So that is Southern, what we thought was the Southern colony, that became Southern Ghana, the colony, and later the potato also come on board. The island of Lagos, the Gambia, Senegal, and Sierra Leone. So by 1910, by the first decade of the 20th century, the whole of Africa, in other words, the African continent, as I've already said, except Ethiopia and Liberia had been colonized by the European powers. And you know such powers that we are talking about. We have France, Britain, Spain, Portugal, Belgium, and Germany. These were some of the European nations that came to colonize African countries. And therefore, we need to find out why they came to colonize, in other words, to partition African countries. And so, first of all, let's look at that from the point of economic reasons. So, economic reasons will be one. We have heard that, yeah. So, the first one that I want to touch on is the new markets. So, they wanted to acquire new markets because of the advent of industrial revolution. Now, industrial revolution was a drastic change in the manufacture of goods from handmade to the use of machines. Now, and it started from Great Britain and spread. Now let's look at the periodization. Started in the late 18th century. That is, yeah, in the late 18th century. That is, we are talking about the 1750s, late 18th century. So the Industrial Revolution gradually spread through the process of diffusion to the other European nations and even US and other areas. So of course, now this was what we're talking about, a drastic change. And a drastic change is what we refer to as revolution. Significant change, drastic change, complete change in the manufacture of goods from handmade to the use of machines. In other words, we will say that um, work that would require, say, 1,000 laborers to do in, say, 1 month, a machine could use only 1 day to finish it or to do it. That will give an idea about, yeah. And therefore, so that was there. Now they needed markets. So all the European nations had become industrialized within the shortest possible time. Because, as I said, when it started from Great Britain, it spread through the process of diffusion to Belgium, to Holland, Belgium, France, Germany, even United States. So within a short time, the European nations had become industrialized. Now, with numerous industries across the world, so and also manufactures many products. Therefore, their local market could not absorb such products, and therefore there was a need for them to look elsewhere. Hence, Africa became the target. And again, with these industries, you bear with me that they would certainly or definitely need raw material to feed such industries because we could not manufacture goods without having raw materials. This was the time that the slaves, yeah, the slaves were now, yeah, they were there in abundance in the New World and of course in the Americas. And of course, this time that Brazil and other areas had also started sugar production, another sugar production, and they were producing more sugar. Yeah, so and therefore, so what the slaves were doing there was actually not were not even significant. What they were doing were not significant. It therefore became vital to obtain raw materials like rubber, timber, gold, ivory, garnets, and palm oil to feed such industries. Okay, palm oil, for example, was urgently needed in Europe and the USA to lubricate machines for effective operation. They also needed it to prepare, to prepare soap, which will be used for domestic and industrial use, and again detergent. So they needed these things. So of course, that was also one of the reasons. Again, investment of surplus capital because of the wealth that came with the industrial revolution. These European nations had accumulated what, immense wealth, and they needed places to invest the surplus capital, accumulated capital, and so Africa became the target. Don't forget, Africa became the target. These were some of the economic factors or reasons. Then social factors, for example, resettlement of unemployed Europeans in Africa. So now, as I said, we know that many laborers were laid off because work that could require maybe many hands to do, a machine could use few hours to do. And therefore, as machines replace human labor in the manufacturing of goods, there was excess human labor or human resource or labor that needed to be sent elsewhere. And so, according to records, about by about 1870, there were more unemployed men and women in England, Germany, and Italy, due largely to lack of jobs because the way that they could do now, machines were manufacturing them. This issue, therefore, was one of the motivating factors for the colonization of Africa. And so there was also the quest, the need for them to spread their culture and civilization, including Western education. Let me add education to it, because this were equated to enlightenment, where that what became known as the European burden in Africa. And so they had a mission, and their mission was which they had to accomplish. And that mission was very simple, to civilize Africans. So they saw Africans to be barbaric, primitive, fetish, and of course, yeah, all they had these terminologies, these adjectives were used against the Africans. What they, of course, they felt that the Africans were in that darkness. They needed to see light, and they saw Christianity as light, synonymous to light, because that actually symbolized Jesus Christ and his teachings, and as against Africans and their worship of idols, African prostrating and kowtowing before trees, plants, rocks, and so on and so forth. Of course, they felt the need to come to Africa and of course civilize Africa so that they would desist from inhuman practices, so that human sacrifice, slave raiding, pioneering, killing of twins, to mention but few. Now and again, to introduce Africans to their former educations, or another Western education. So literacy and numeracy acquisition. They felt that it was time that Africans should have these. As for Christianity, I've already had introduced you to. They, yeah, they were of the view that they had, of course, seen the teaching, since they had met Christ, that the Son of God, they should introduce Jesus Christ to Africans, so the African will know that God Jesus represented the way, the truth, and life, and therefore there was the need for them there was the need for them to introduce Africans to Christianity. There are also political factors as well, which we need to talk about, and that is prestige and glory. Some European nations came to colonize African countries on grounds of prestige. Yeah, on grounds of prestige. Such nations included even Germany and Italy. Germany was the last European nation to come. Italy even came to acquire colonies on grounds of prestige. And don't forget that France, if you look at France, don't even when you look at West Africa, French West Africa, France acquired many territories in Africa to show that, in fact, in the 1870, 71, the Franco-Prussian War, that is the German and then the French War. Within that war, led to the defeat of France, and France became disgraced in Europe. So, to show the whole world that she was so powerful, she turned her attention to Africa, and that explains why now when you look at even West Africa, you have many French kind territories or colonies in West Africa. Now there was also the need to balance, the need to address the issue of balance of power in Europe, to tilt it so that it will be balanced, and no power will be so powerful than the other, or no nation will be powerful. And this is fueled by the ionization of African territory. So we could get them to balance the power so that we become powerful. Another power will not threaten you, and so forth. Now, a rare epitome was the Turkish War of 1877-78. And one significant effect of this war was its creation of balance of power in Europe. Now, the European countries increased their overseas colonies in order to become a powerful nation. So, for this reason, other European nations concentrated, in other words, concentrated their attention on Africa and Latin America. That's why they colonized these areas. There was also the need for them to acquire overseas colonies. And so, if you look at them, Portugal, for example, annexed Canary Islands, Madeira, Cape Verde, Sao Tome, Azores, and Fernando Po. The French also annexed Senegal between 1687 and 1702. The British established the Crown Colony of Senegambia in 1783. These issues finally led to the colonization of the entire Africa, except Ethiopia, and of course Liberia. So I want you to find out why Ethiopia and Liberia were not, why these two African countries were not colonized. So why? What was the reason? Why? Yeah. So at the end of this, you explain why these European nations were not colonized. Now, what were the effects? In other words, the impact of the partition. The impact one was unification of different ethnic groups. I don't think this ones that I'm even teaching you, me myself, I don't accept them, but I'm already exposing you to them because I don't see any positive effects or impact of colonization. You are colonized people and they suffer. What will be the positive? But that notwithstanding, we still have certain positive fallout or ramifications, which of course we need to draw your attention. One was unification of different ethnic groups, it brought them together. Yeah, people came together to form associations to fight the canker. Again, people are there was that kind of acquisition of common geographical space and name. For example, Ghana, there was no name that referred to the Gold Coast. It was each state was independent. We had the Dina, Elmina, we had Kumasi, so they were states. But of course, it was through the contact that we had with this colonizer that we had, for example, so the name Gold Coast was even given to us by the Portuguese. They gave that name. Then, of course, there were also social amenities. By which social amenities did they provide? Western education was a fallout. It was an accident, a kind of an offshoot or an accident of the interaction that we had with them, and not necessarily something that was calculated. That's why initially, even when the merchants came, they provided to their for the mulattoes and the wealthy few were the influential Africans. Yeah, so the use of currency. But the most important thing is let's dwell extensively on the negative effects. So fragmentation of ethnic groups. Now look at ethnic groups. They are now fragmented. So you take the Ewe, for example. We have some Ewe in the Volta region. Yeah, in Ghana, I have some Ewe in Ghana. You have some of them in Togo. Why? They are brothers and sisters. So why? So the Yoruba also shared between the French and the British, British, Nigeria, and French. Why? And others. Again, it declined the power and authority of the chiefs. So because of indirect rule that was introduced, the chiefs became stooges. Now they became appendages of British officials or the European officials. And so look at the way we revered or respect our chiefs, and they becoming just stooges. That was not the best at all. These chiefs are seen to be sacred. In other words, they are divine, semi-divine. Because they are served. They served as a link between the spirit world and the physical world. So look at, for example, Ajman Prempeh and Ajman Prempeh the first. Was arrested and exiled. Yeah, Yasantua was also they did the same to Yasantua, and even Kinagri was also exiled. That will give you an idea about some of these things. And there was also relegation of African culture to the background. Everything in Africa attracted the regulator of mass, animism, fetishism, barbaric, primitive, and what have you. So that will give you an idea about how they looked upon African culture. So nothing good could come from Africa. And so they tended, as one person would say, carefully to follow the words of St. Paul. What has a believer to do with an unbeliever? Separate yourself from them, says the Lord. Okay. So there was also exploitation of African human and natural resources. And there, so African lands, they exported African labor, land, and other resources for colonial gap for them. Yeah. So let's look at the gap now. I think the thing is giving me feedback. So let's try to address if someone is trying to do something, let me stop. Now look at Ghana. Let's take Ghana and Great Britain, especially colonized by the British. So you see the way they are well developed. They took all our resources to develop their countries. So go to Great Britain and see how they are developed. Look at internet. Sometimes yesterday, the whole of yesterday, I promised you that we were going to meet yesterday and meet today. Yesterday, before I became aware, I did not even hear the announcement. 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. the whole day, no lights. How? How could this happen? Could this ever happen in Great Britain? I was ready to have, I was even thinking that the light will come so that we could have our class in the evening. I waited and waited and waited. It did not come. This thing cannot happen in Great Britain. They don't forget that they exported our resources to develop their countries. You go there, You internet, you everything is superb, excellent. But look at Ghana here. Sometimes you'll be at a place you want to have class, no internet. Even some there are some towns and villages and villages in Ghana here where when you get there, no internet. On Sunday, for example, I there was an emergency. I had to attend a certain emergency. I went with my laptop and all my things to have the class with you, so that I'll have a meeting and then I will do my class. Then the place I went, no internet. I didn't know. So what is this? So I couldn't have my class. Look at this. In 21st century, where we are in the era of AI, artificial intelligence, and still look at even Ghana. So you see, these are some of the hitches, some of the challenges. Go to Great Britain, you will never, or look this European data we are talking about, you will never see some of this. They export their resources to develop their countries, and that's there again. There was exploitation of African resources to their advantage. I've already touched on that, and both human resources. So the slave trade that was introduced and all that. Look at the way they developed. So we have now African Americans. So why? Okay, anyway. So these were some of them. Now let's having seen partition and reasons for factors for partition and effects of partition, we'll quickly delve into colonial rule. Colonial rule in West Africa. First of all, let's look at what is colonialism in simple words. What is colonialism? So colonialism refers to the system or process by which a foreign power, so we can say France or Britain or Germany, Italy, imposed its hegemony or authority on a weaker nation or power. You can say Ghana or Nigeria, or you can say Sierra Leone or Gambia. Yeah, so that is it. Now, so rearrangement of space. Such aspects of the weaker nations were rearranged to the benefit of the foreign powers. In West Africa, for example, the British colonized the Gold Coast, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, and the Gambia. The French colonized Mali, Guinea, Senegal, Niger, Mauritania, Benin, Togo, Burkina Faso, and Ivory Coast. Germany also annexed Togoland, Cameroon, Tanganyika, and Southwest Africa, which you know present day. Yeah, so these were some of the colonies that these powers had. In other words, colonized. So how did they determine their administrative patterns? Now, one was that perception or an attitude of the colonial power towards Africans. Don't forget that many of them, the French, for example, believed that Africans could effectively become an integral part of their citizenry. So what did they do? That's why initially they introduced the assimilation that was meant to allow the people to acquire French citizenship and so on and so forth. Now, Portugal thought that Africans were incapable of acquiring their citizenship. The Belgians and the Germans considered Africans as uncivilized and had to be guided to attain civilization. So this was their mindset. And so the administrative pattern would decide. Some of them would adopt assimilation, some of them would adopt indirect rule, some of them would adopt direct rule, and it differed depending on how they felt. Again, the stretch and size of the territory, whether it was vast or small. Then again, the number of European officials on the spot. So, for example, if you wanted to adopt direct rule, did you have the men? Do you have the men? Did you have? If you did not, then you need to adopt indirect so that you could use the people, some of them to assist. Hence, indirect rule in Ghana and other African or West African countries. So the policy of the British in West Africa was the indirect rule system. The French also adopted the French and the Portuguese used assimilation and paternalism. Now yeah, the Portuguese adopted the policy of paternalism. Now such policy will look at that maybe as we move on. And so indirect rule, I think you are familiar with indirect rule, where you know the British. Okay, so what is the policy of indirect rule? Now here we are saying that it's a system whereby the colonial government made use of some local people and the existing indigenous structures or institution of traditional rulers or chieftains is simple. It was a local administrative system by which the British ruled in West African colonies through the chiefs. That's very simple. Now, the inception of indirect rule. Don't forget that you could trace its background to Lord Lookout in 1922. Gettysburg became Gettysburg governor, and Gettysburg became Sir Gordon Gettysburg became a governor in the Gold Coast in 1919. In 1919. So don't forget. Yeah, so he was the one who also applied or adopted indirect rule in Ghana, adopted it indirect rule in Ghana. So this policy thrived effectively first in Uganda and later in northern Nigeria. So the British felt it was good and adopted it in Ghana. Okay, so even though some historians agree with this assertion, others have raised stiff opposition to the view. Some scholars such as Lugard, as some scholars see Lugard as having plagiarized other authors when whom he failed to acknowledge. So Gurley, for example, has traced the origin of indirect rule to Liwen of Gambia, Print to Godi of the Royal Niger Company, and Leggy to Gordon of Fiji. So in Ghana, for example, the policy became operational during the time of Sir Gordon, as I've already said. And so ordinances were promulgated. Now, one of such ordinances was the Native Jurisdiction Ordinance of 1878, which was reenacted and applied in 1888. This ordinance set out to regulate the powers of chiefs in controlling local tribunals. It also limited the jurisdiction and all that. So, of course, um, chiefs were thus allowed to make bylaws but subject to approval of the British governor. Sets of amendments were made in 1910, 1924, and 1927, respectively. And so the 1927 ordinance, for example, gave the colonial authority the power to elect and distill a chief. Now, reason for the adoption of indirect rule, one was financial constraints or inadequate funds. They did not have adequate funds to pay their British officials and so on and so forth to run for direct administration, hence indirect. Then, of course, inadequate personnel on the spot. The British did not have people that they could recruit them. Look at Ghana, for example. If you take Ghana as an example, it was so vast. So could they get the men to work? It was not possible. Again, effective administration of large and inaccessible territory. They were not familiar with the territory that was so vast. That could not be possible. There was also the issue of language barrier. There was also, yeah, so now they needed interpreters. And how could they administer this vast territory? One, they did not understand the language of the indigents. And so they could not be always relying on interpreters. Hence, they saw indirect rule as the ideal. Effective administrative systems of Africa, I think that we are part on that. Already there were effective systems. The chiefs were the natural leaders, and they felt that they could rely on them. There were also the issue of poor communication and transport networks at the time that they were deplorable rules and so on and so forth. Now, so in during the indirect rule, what were the functions of the chiefs? The function of the chiefs. One was that they attended to trivial issues, cases. They settled cases. They also serve as a link between the colonial government and the people. And then they were also in charge of tax collection. Yeah, they collected taxes on behalf of the colonial government. They also maintained law and order. They ensured that law and order were maintained. So maintenance of law and order at the local level, they were assisted by the police force or by the police in this regard. They were allowed to make bylaws, arrest, try, and fine or imprison lawbreakers. And so that was that. They also implemented certain policies of the colonial administration. Now let's have after now that we have seen the policy of indirect rule, let's briefly look at the policy of assimilation. This was one of the ideological underpinnings of French colonial administration in West Africa. What we mean by assimilation is that, so by this policy, French culture, civilization, and laws were to be imbibed by all her overseas territories, irrespective of their economy, race, religious beliefs, size, and distance. So now they were supposed to be acquired. In other words, to follow their culture, their civilization, their way of life, the food they eat, the language they spoke, and all that. Yeah. Now, the French that centralized the administration of its colonies were the headquarters located in Paris, France. So the colonies, as I've already said, were considered as an extension or integral part of metropolitan France. And so they operated through the four communes in Senegal. So we had Gori, Dakar, Rufisque, and St. Louis. Okay. Now, was the policy of assimilation important at all? Yeah, it improved the living standard of the citizens of the French West Africa. It made Africans an integral part of metropolitan France. And again, there was a relative peace and stability in France. Assimilated Africans had the opportunity for higher education. Yeah, they were referred to as the rule. Now, there was also improvement in the production of cash crops. Yeah, railways and roads were also constructed. There were also disadvantages as well. Now, the policy, are you with me?
Yes, doctor.
Okay, good.
Yes, we are with you.
Yeah, so the policy also has certain defects. One was that it dehumanized Africans through the introduction of forced labor. And yeah, again, it led to political and socioeconomic inequalities as citizens receive better treatment and condition of service than the mere subjects. The policy also looked down upon African culture and considered it as inferior to the French culture. So African culture had to be dropped for the more superior European culture to be used, so that it was the expectation that African would imbibe such cultures. The subjects were deprived of their fundamental human rights, such as freedom of speech, association, and movement. Africans were divided into citizens and subjects, and different administrative systems applied. Now, yeah, so the French later changed their assimilation to association, which was equivalent to the policy of indirect rule. So that's a non good part on this one. Now, the Portuguese also adopted assimilation. Now, we have heard of the assimilado. So they adopted the policy of assimilation in Africa through a decree passed in 1917. And so this decree specified the requirement that subjects in the colony had to fulfill in order to be assimilated into the Portuguese culture. So it had to be assimilated. Now the assimilated were referred to as the assimilado. And to attain the status of assimilado, a person must have completed official primary school and be enabled to read, write, and speak Portuguese. The assimilados were provided with an identity card, and if the card got lost, the person forfeited his or her identity of assimilado. So that would give an idea about it. Now, the Portuguese colonies were segregated into whites, assimilados, mestizos. These were persons of mixed Africans and Asian birth. Okay. Then we have mulattoes, mixed European and African birth, and the indigents the indigents. So the indigents had restricted civil rights and personal liberties. So, for example, the education of the indigents was restricted to a 2-year primary education in the school located in the village. Now, the mother could enjoy various civil rights and, of course, personal liberties. Now, the Germans adopted the policy of paternalism. And here, it is worth for us to delve into that. But of course, Germany, right from the onset, wished to gain more colonies in Europe itself. It was largely due to the quest of the businessmen in Germany that made it possible for Germany to also come to acquire colonies in Africa. Paternalism was a direct system of administration adopted by the Germans, which was born out of the belief in the superiority of the European race and culture, and that they had a mission to guide Africans to civilization. So colonized Africans were considered as children. Take note of this. It was Germany that considered her colonies as children, and who needed protection and guidance. So they were considered children, and they were the parents. So that would tell you how they saw Africans at the time. And each colony was divided into districts headed by the district officer known as the Bilsaman. And there was also a detachment of the policy whose responsibility was to ensure the maintenance of law and order. We have the Akida. Akida were nominated and sent to administrator to administer other districts different from their home districts. So the Akida. Now, under strict supervision of German district officer who could dismiss such a person. Okay. And going so forth. Okay. Now, I think this is where I will end with the fair, yeah, with the partition of Africa and then other issues. Questions before I proceed with my class. Yeah, if you have a question, you can ask before I continue. If no question, then I will continue again. I'm going to switch forward.
Hello,
Yeah,
Doc, please.
you
We
said what?
cannot see the screen.
Okay, okay. You can't see the screen.
Yes, please.
Oh, I
Yes,
did not
please.
share the screen.
Yes, please. You didn't.
Oh, pardon me. Oh. I opened it straight. Oh, sorry. I thought I had shared the screen. Oh,
Okay.
oh, oh. So the course I found to you didn't see me sharing it.
No, we didn't see anything at all.
Oh, sorry, sorry. I think now you can see the screen.
Yes, please. Now I can.
Okay, okay, okay. So I have everything, but because I thought that I had shared it. Oh, I didn't see. And it didn't draw my attention.
Oh,
Okay,
yes. Because we're teaching, that's why we don't want to interrupt you.
okay. Yeah. So if you have questions, fine. If you don't have, whilst you're thinking about your question, let me share another slide and move ahead.
Okay. I wanted to ask, looking at the French countries in Africa, the German and the French, they colonized Togo, for instance. So what happened before the French dominated the German?
Okay, I'm coming, please. It's a very good question. Wait for me. Okay, so what happened? You want to know why? Yeah, the French were able to dominate. So, but I know initially, Togo was a German territory.
Yes,
You
please.
have to trace it from World War. Yeah, from the First World War. Yeah, you have to trace it from the First World War. Now you know that the First World War, that was the deadliest war ever fought in humanity until the outbreak of World War II. And so, if you look at the casualties, those who died, both combatants and non-combatants. If you say we are going to talk about them today, maybe you are lucky you have already eaten. But if you have not eaten, then it will be difficult for you to eat. So, of course, looking at the number of people who died, human beings were nothing, especially the war at the battlefield, the war front, various wars, theater of wars. And so,
Mhm.
of course, they saw that Germany was responsible for the outbreak of World War.
Okay.
Yeah, you know, Germany was responsible because if Austria did not have the support of Germany, Austria, there was no way that Austria could go ahead to declare a war on Serbia. And you know that at the time of European alliances, I think we'll look at where it was and go into more detail. And then you know that the treaty that concluded the World War One, Germany was humiliated. In fact, Germany was so punished so severely and in order not for Germany to become a powerful state. So they decided to abrogate German empire and to condemn Germany to a mere territory, a small territory, so that Germany will not become powerful again, to cause a war that will involve the whole humanity. And that's why German territories were taken from her, so that Germany will become small. And so if you look at it, even Volta Togoland was given to the British as caretakers. They should take care. And Togo was given to the French. And that was how come Togo became a French area. I think when we get to World War, we'll talk more on that. Um, yeah, I don't know whether I've
Oh,
answered or I've not answered you.
oh, yes,
And
please. You have answered.
so,
Thank you, sir.
oh, you're welcome. I want to share another screen, this thing so that I've not shared. Have I shared screen now? No. Hello, hello, Justice. Justice,
Yeah.
I think I've not shared any screen. Eh?
Yes, please.
But you
Doc, you
see
are
now,
not sharing it.
I'm now sharing it.
Yeah.
Okay, I just want to see. Okay, so do you see the screen?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so once you see, then that is okay. Yeah, so European expansion in West Africa. Some of these issues I've already explained them, so I'm just thinking that there's no need for me to. So keeping imperialism and all that. I don't want to go there so much. I've already touched on some of them. Excellent points. I don't know why I should go more to explain. Um, Coast Elmina, the man Elmina. Anyway, so background to European colonial expansion in Africa. So how did they want to have the background to now the antecedents to that, which I'm going to just historicize it briefly. Um, yeah, so for many centuries, African gold obtained principally from the region of modern Ghana had appeared in North Africa and across to Europe through the trans-Saharan trade. So you have heard a lot about the trans-Saharan trade. Okay, during the time of during the time of the classical West African civilizations of ancient Ghana, Mali, Songhai, especially Mali, we heard a lot about the TST or what we refer to as the caravan trade and how variable that trade was. So the Portuguese way to divert the trade. So on the eastern side, the Muslims traded gold for Zimbabwe and sending it to Middle East and India. The Portuguese wished to divert this trade into their own hands. So the fact was that they needed gold to pay for the spices they sought in South India and elsewhere in the Far East. Now in their exploratory west, the Portuguese succeeded in establishing settlements in Africa. One of the first Portuguese settlements in West African coast was Elmina. So those of you, the mind, Elmina. So or Edina, what you require, Elmina. In the east, they succeeded by the late 16th century in penetrating Zambezi region and establishing settlements and trading posts on the highlands of modern Zimbabwe. The effort to secure the African gold, the African gold to themselves failed, even though, so they made strides. They made strides in every okay. So until recently, it was a common to explain European difficulties in Africa in terms of geography, climate, and disease. If you say you want to show no geography, climate, and disease, genuinely, Africa has few navigable rivers. Europeans on the coast were separated from the interior by forests, and in the south, central, and east Africa, both by arid areas and escarpments. They also suffered high mortality rates through fever, and more importantly, found it impossible to use the horse and the ox to penetrate Africa as a result of the fact that none could survive the disease borne by the fly. So sometimes we look at malaria and fly. I don't know. Otherwise, I think Ghana, Africa, West Africa will be, British West Africa will be dominated by whites, people of white race, like South Africa. Yeah, because they might have come here in their numbers, but because they died in their numbers. You see, God is good all the time, and all the time God is good. Yeah. Otherwise, you would say that the Europeans or the whites might have dominated African countries. Look at Africa. The Chinese come here, they don't want to go back. You see, they've seen that our land is endowed with gold and other precious resources or minerals. And so, of course, the fry and yeah, the malaria fever. So that's the parasite that spread that. So we are very grateful to them anyway. It depends on how you argue. Now, Europeans and other continents faced very considerable difficulties, which were which they were able to overcome. The major factor to the European failure was that Africans successfully resisted them. At this stage, Europe did not enjoy the military superiority she was to establish later. And so, organize them protests, for example, the Asante and the British. And had not been because of the superior weapon that the British used, they couldn't have been able to defeat the Asante. No, that whole with all organized armies, they were effective anyway. Now we can look at that. Okay, so now, yeah, that will give an idea about how these people were powerful, how powerful they were. In spite of this repeated failure, the Europeans continued to stay on the coast of Africa until the time that they will eventually colonize many African countries, as we have just seen. Okay. Now, during the first half of the 19th century, it became clear that significant changes in the pattern of Europe's relationship with Africa were to occur. Africa was becoming more important for the commodities it could supply directly to Europe. So palm oil and granules have touched on some of these things. And that's why I walked you through the partition and these things that were needed. By the middle of the 19th century, therefore, the effectiveness of quinine to ward off malaria was well attested, and Europeans were able to survive in West and other parts of Africa. In Southern Africa, the slow advance of Europeans into the interior quickened dramatically in the 1830s, when parties of Dutch farmers, that is the Boers, decided to seek new lands on the uplands and avoid the annoying catastrophes of British rule. Okay, anyway. So in the East, in East Africa, Indian, British, American, French, and German traders were anxious to exploit the growing trade there. And yeah, so this was giving you the idea, the background. Now, they were more concerned to yeah, how they could prosper in Africa or the prospered Africa for potential annexation. Their work was nationalistic, concerned to thwart the activities of other European explorers in developing scramble for possession. The most remarkable of all these explorers was David Livingstone. He was a distinguished and observant scientist, but his science was more devoted to the spread of Christianity and commerce, white settlement, and European power. He died in 1873, before the scramble for Africa actually took place. And so in 1880, and of course, you can argue that the 1880 was very significant. 1880s, because 1884 85 was when the Berlin Conference or the West African Conference took place, where they put in place certain measures that will guide the acquisition of territories uh, in Africa. Yeah, in Africa. So let's look at their expansion. So the British had founded settlement, as I've said, at Freetown, Sierra Leone in the 1780s, where they could land free slaves. Now the slaves that were freed. So Sierra Leone was, Freetown was created now, where they could do that. They also had possessions at the mouth of the Gambia River. And on the Gold Coast, the main area of French interest was on the Senegal River and its adjacent coast, where the French actually attempted to set a settlement of Europeans from 1818. They failed, but failed. Now, in 1849, the British appointed a consul for the Bight of Benin and Biafra, thereby making a preliminary claim to sphere of influence in the Niger region. So that is where they wanted, they used that place as they acquired their jurisdiction. That was what they had their hegemony, as their sphere of influence, had control over the place. In addition to the significant spheres of influence of the French and the British, there were trading settlements and forts belonging to the Portuguese, the Spaniards, the Dutch, the Danes, and all. All these were scattered, in the south, and they were there. And that's the warehouse where they also kept their goods initially. And that is it. So a number of reasons were responsible for these territorial expansions. One was repeated involvement of men on the spot. I've touched on all these things as reasons for the adoption of imperialism or colonialism. So the vastness, the need, but of course, you can look at what referred to as the creeping partition. I don't think it's relevant to me anyway. But mercantile pressures were also mounted on the French government to ensure the French commercial spheres in West Africa were not lost. And so individual traders secured French consulship for themselves and their employees and joined in pressing forward annexation to secure their trade, and so on and so forth. So by 1879, as a result, the French had developed the idea of a vast West African empire linking Algeria to the Western Sudan, consolidated by the building of a great trans-Saharan railway. Railway. And that is it. Just as these Anglo-French tensions were building to a climax, two new elements emerged to speed up the creeping partition of West Africa. And these were the colony designs of King Leopold of the Belgians and the Germans' involvement in the whole process. King Leopold had harbored ambitions of establishing a great private colony, either in Asia or in Africa. So that was his ambition. And so in 1870s, his attention was drawn to the west central region of Africa by the writings of the naval officer and explorer. So Verny Lubet Cameron and the journalist H.M. Stanley. So they drew his attention. In 1876, he called for a conference of geographers and other interested in Africa in Brussels and set up the International African Association. He did that. And as early as 1880s, he had agents collecting treaties from African chiefs in the Congo area. In 1880, a French explorer, de Brazza, attempted to approach the Congo from the French territory of Gabon and had also made treaties with which were accepted by the French government in 1882. So these were some of the moves that were made. The second element appeared further north and west. Two German companies had established themselves in the Cameroons. In 1884, German explorer Gustav Nidgal arrived there and proceeded to collect treaties from African chiefs, and that was the first attempt. So, as for reason for European partition, I've already walked you through all the reasons for the partition. So, economic reasons, but you read for more diverse the need for markets, for the sale of surplus manufactured goods, the demand for raw materials, the need for outlets of investment of surplus capital, political ideological orientations, balance of power, nationalism, diverting citizens' attention from internal difficulties there because of those who have become unemployed and the advent of industrial revolution. Social factors like colonization as a solution to European unemployed and population growth. European unemployed and population growth. Very important. Propagation of Christianity, as I've already explained. Propagation of Christianity The desire to stop slavery, the desire to stop slavery was also another issue. So the desire to seek a total end to slavery was yet another social factor that accounted for the European rush for African territories. The anti-slavery movement bent on stemming the tide of the shameful trade in slaves was one of the strongest determination of both the British and the French policy in tropical Africa. So this course was dramatized by the heroic work of the Scottish mission and explorer, Dr. David Livingstone. In the mid-19th century, Livingstone explored extensively Southern and Central Africa for nearly 20 years. He witnessed and accumulated evidence of the injustices Africans suffered as a result of the Arab slavers in these areas. He appealed to European governments to help end the slave trade and bring Christianity and commerce to Africa. So Livingstone his appeal had whet the public appetite for a Christian civilizing mission in Africa. And so that was also one of the factors. Now, the Berlin Conference. The Berlin Conference. Yeah. I think I've said a lot. I've already mentioned the Berlin Conference, and I remember saying that it took place in 1884-85, and it involved representatives of 14 European countries, the major ones of which were Britain, France, Germany, Portugal, and Belgium. These were major powers that were present at the conference. That is also referred to as the West African Conference, the Berlin Conference or the West African Conference. Okay. Now, the United States of America was also there. The Ottoman Empire, facing the loss of territory on all sides, was not represented at the conference at all. At the time, the Ottomans were in trouble. Now, as Europeans negotiated their rights to African territory, not a single African country was present, or not a single African was present. Much of the conference took place outside Berlin as envoys moved between London, Paris, and Brussels, negotiating which European power could rightfully claim lands inhabited by Africans. Now, what was the principal motive of the conference? The main aims of the conference were: one, to discuss in a peaceful manner European claims to African territories, and two, to agree on modalities for the partitioning of the African continent. We have to do that. How are they going to do that so that European nations will not collide to cause a war that would involve the whole world? So they were trying to avert world war. Okay. Now, this session, major agreements that were reached. So let's look at some of the agreements at the Berlin Conference, and some of them, So the major ones reached were contained in a treaty signed at the Berlin West African Conference on February 26, 1885, called the Treaty of Berlin. Take note of this: the Treaty of Berlin, or the Berlin Arts, or the General Art of Berlin. Anyway, either of these. Now, among the important provisions of the Act were: one, any European power making claim to any part of Africa or coastline of Africa should notify the other signatory powers involved in the conference in order to enable them, if need be, to make a good any claims of their own. All claims to territories in Africa by any European power should be followed by effective occupation, not to become valid. So you don't just use your mouth to claim, but you have to go and settle the effective occupation. All European powers should be free to trade in the Congo Basin. So that place, everybody could trade there, and they should all maintain free navigation on the Congo and the Niger rivers. Treaties made with African chiefs were to be considered as valid titles to sovereignty. as very title to sovereignty. Okay. Now every imperial power, that is European power, was to be free to extend its coastal occupations within certain limits into the interior and establish spheres of influence. The straight trade should be stopped immediately. Yeah, because they were going to come to Africa to do it. So they want Africans to remain there. To implement this, the conference also decided that all European traders, missionaries, and other agents who would want to go to the interior of Africa to help stop the slave trade should be protected by the occupying power. A ban was put on importing firearms into Africa, which resulted in Europeans having a monopoly on guns in Africa. They were very wise. If they had not put a ban on importation for importing firearms to Africa, and Africa had also bought the firearms, then they couldn't have been able to colonize Africa because Africa would face them squarely. Finally, the material and moral benefits of European civilization were to be extended to Africans. Now, weakness and achievement of the conference. So, what were the weaknesses? So, immediately after the conference, then now, the Europeans partition had taken place. The conference failed to achieve a measure of success in some areas. For example, the conference declared that all European powers were free to navigate in the Congo and the Niger rivers, but failed to show in practical terms the way to undo that. And so King Leopold of Belgium and George Tuckman Goldie, a British businessman, from to establish monopolies on the Congo, and these were there. Another decision of the conference that appeared weak was its decision on effective occupation or effective administration. This referred to European princes on the coastlines of Africa. And so, again, the conference declared that a coastline must be effectively occupied before it could be declared a colony. Most of the West African coast was already occupied by some of the European powers before this. So now it's a weakness. Again, the conference had a number of outstanding achievements. Okay, so conference recognized the area claimed by Leopold and his International African Association over the Congo. There was also the effective occupation theory of the conference compared the European powers to set up direct or indirect administration. And again, this effective occupation principle was also applied. Finally, the most important achievement of the conference was that the European nations carried out the Scramble and partition of Africa without engaging each other in open war. Problems arising from occupation of territories were settled by a series of bilateral agreements which extended over many uh, centuries. So, questions on what we have raised so far? Hello, are you with me?
Doc, please, we are with you.
Okay, so if you have questions, you can now ask me. If not, then we'll break here for about uh 10 minutes, and then 5 minutes will be okay, and then stretch to um USA and Russia, please.
Oh, okay, sir.
Okay, Doc.
Okay, Doc.
Okay, Doc.
So, brothers, I hope after this, Doc will be able to slide so that can read well.
But for the slides on the page, everything is there.
Hello.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
Yes, are you talking about the slides?
Yeah, about the slide.
Yes, everything is there.
Okay. All right,
Mm-hmm.
sir. All right, Doc.
Oh, okay. This is Justice, your colleague.
Oh. So after the lecture, can even print it out.
Oh, okay. Everything is there.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, sir.
Oh, okay. You're welcome, boss.
So my brother, where are you?
Oh, Cape Coast.
Oh, I'm also in Cape Town.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I am at Ola.
Oh, okay. Maybe we will meet one day.
Yeah, about me.
Oi, some of us are in Upper West.
Hello, Justice.
Yes, sir.
Please, I want to make a suggestion. If you are sharing the slides, try to post it to the respective groups that the slide belong to. For instance,
Oh.
if it is Latin, share it to the Latin group so that when we are picking it from there, I don't know whether you understand what I'm saying. It will be easy for us.
Okay. Well noted.
Okay, thank you very much.
I think our time is over. Our break is over.
Yes, please, Doc.
Okay, so we can go on.
Yes, please. We are ready.
Okay, so now let's look at the coming of the Civil War in the US. Okay, so period to the war, background to the Civil War. So the climax of the climax of years of escalating interstate tensions over slavery was the secession of the Southern states in 1860, 1861. And such states included South Carolina, Mississippi, Florida, etc. So now the northern states economies underwent a fast modernization and diversification between 1815 and 1816. Additionally, Northerners had made significant investment in vast and diverse network of transportation that included canals, roads, steamboats, railroads, as well as in financial sectors like banking and insurance, and a vast network of communications that included the telegraph and cheap, widely accessible newspapers. Significant investment was made in financial sectors like banking and insurance, as well as okay, so cheap. Okay, I think I've said this thing. Now, inspection and sale of a Negro. The southern economy, in contrast, was primarily centered on sizable farms that produce commercial crops. I think I'm trying to do comparison of the north and the south of the US. Okay, so that you know what what we are the issue of slavery and its emancipation, all that will come with, and as far as its effects. Now, as I said, okay, so the southern economy, in contrast, was primarily or mainly centered on sizable farms that produce commercial crops like cotton and also use slaves as a primary source of labor or primary labor force. But even as late as 1860, there seemed like a wise move to the Southerners. Slaves who were, after all, property saw a rise in value in the 1850s as the price of cotton, the South staple commodity, also increased dramatically. Now, the extension of slavery into new territories and states had been an issue as far as back as the Northwest Ordinance of 1784. When the slave territory of Missouri sought statehood in 1818, Congress, the US Congress, debated for 2 years before arriving upon the Missouri Compromise of 1820. And this was the first of a series of political deals that resulted from arguments between pro-slavery and anti-slavery forces over the expansion of the peculiar institution as it was known into the West. Now, what brought about the Civil War? So that's the main issue. That's the most important thing. Causes of the Civil War here. The conflict between the proponents and the opponents of slavery that had existed since the United States establishment culminated in the American Civil War. So those who were for and those who were against it eventually would lead or would culminate into the war. A number of political compromises had been made to diffuse this sectional strife between the slave-owning southern states and the northern states. But by the late 1850s, the problem of extending slavery to the western states had boiled over. In 1854, the US Congress passes the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Take note of this. The Kansas-Nebraska Act, which essentially opened all new territory to slavery by asserting the rule of popular sovereignty over congressional edicts. So here, pro and anti-slavery forces struggled valiantly in bleeding Kansas, while opposition to the act in the North led to the formation of the Republican Party. And this was a new political entity based on the principle of opposing slavery's extension. No, slavery should not be extended. They were against the extension of slavery, and so they formed a new party, Republican Party. Now, yeah, after the Supreme Court's ruling in the Dred Scott case, 1857 confirmed the legality of slavery in the territories. The abolitionist John Brown's raid at Harper's Ferry in 1859 convinced more and more Southerners that their northern neighbors were bent on the destruction of their peculiar institution that sustained their livelihood and that sustained them because they needed them for their labor force and all that. Okay, now, so the outbreak of the war, having seen the main cause of the war as the issue of slavery. Now, how did the war start? How the war started? Confederate soldiers were posing a threat to the federally held Fort Sumter in Charleston, South Carolina, even at Lincoln's June office in March 1861. The first shots of the Civil War were fired by Confederate artillery on April 12th, when Lincoln gave the order for a fleet to resupply Sumter. So after fewer than 2 days bombardment, Major Robert Anderson, the fort's commander, gave up, handling control of the fort over to the Perry G. Burger and the Confederate soldiers. Now, following Fort Sumter, the Confederacy was joined by 4 more southern states, which included Virginia, Arkansas, North Carolina, and Tennessee. So border slave states like Missouri, Kentucky, and Maryland did not secede. Their populace had a strong rebel sentiment, so they did not succeed. Despite the fact that 23 states of the Union appeared to have had a huge edge in population, manufacturing, and railroad building, the Confederates had a solid military heritage and some of the best troops and commanders in the country. So a number of Union forces were forced to flee towards Washington, D.C. on July 21st, 1861, as a result of the actions of 35,000 Confederate soldiers under the leadership of Thomas Jonathan Stonewall Jackson. So this ended any hopes of a quick Union victory and prompted Lincoln to issue a call for 500,000 more recruits. So the military background of the North and South. Yeah. At first, it appeared that 11 southern states had no chance against the 22 states that remained in the Union after secession, after others had left the U.S., the Union. Now, 9 million people existed in the South, of which around 4 million were slaves, compared to about 21 million in the North. That will give an idea. More than 100,000 manufacturing facilities, compared to 18,000 south of the Potomac River, were located in North, and more than 70% of the railroads were in the Union. So the Federals also have a 30-to-1 advantage in the production of weapons, a 2-to-1 advantage in the amount of people at their disposal, and a substantial amount of commercial and financial resources. A functioning administration and a modest but effective regular army and navy were also present in the Union. Now, in addition to having a long military legacy in American history, prior to 1860, the Southern forces enjoyed the advantage of fighting on interior lines. So Confederate soldiers fought to establish what they dubbed Southern institutions, the primary of which was the institution of slavery, as a separate and independent nation. Now the high commands. In 1861, most people believed Davis to be the more capable of the 2 contending commanders in chief than Lincoln. Now, Davis was successful Secretary of War under President Franklin Pierce, a graduate of the U.S. Military Academy, a hero of the Mexican-American War, and a Mississippi state legislator and senator. Now, Lincoln could only boast of a brief period of military service in the Black Hawk War, in which he saw little action. Now, Lincoln had previously served in the Illinois state legislature and as an unremarkable one-term representative in the U.S. House of Representatives. Davis demonstrated many admirable traits while serving as the president and commander-in-chief of the Confederate forces, including dignity, firmness, determination, and honesty. However, he was marred by his excessive pride and hypersensitivity to criticism, lack of political acumen, and propensity for micromanaging. Davis' effectiveness was further hindered by a political system that prohibited organized political parties, which Southerners believed to be at least partially to blame for the outbreak of the Civil War. Now, to the surprise of many, Lincoln grew in stature with time and experience, and by 1864 he had honed his political and military skills to an unmatched level. You could not match him at all. So his exceptional intelligence, communication ability, could speak well with humanity, sense of purpose, sense of humor, inherently moderate character, and capacity to maintain perspectives helped him develop into a very effective president. Nonetheless, he had a lot to learn at first, particularly in terms of the strategic and tactical issues, as well as his selection of army commanders. Now, the Civil War in Virginia, 1862. After the first several months of the war, George B. McClellan, who succeeded the ailing General Winfield Scott as Supreme Commander of the Union Army, was well liked by his soldiers, but disappointed Lincoln with slowness to advance. In the spring of 1862, McClellan ultimately pushed his army of the Potomac along the peninsula between York and James Rivers, seizing Yorktown on May 4th. During the 7 days battles that were June 25th to July 1st, Robert E. Lee and Andrew Jackson combined forces successfully repulsed McClellan's army. Afterwards, Lee divided his army and pushed his troops north, sending Jackson to meet Pope's forces close to Manassas, while he went separately with the other half of the army. Now, the army of the Potomac attacked Lee's men on September 17th, beginning the deadliest single day of combat in the whole conflict. And here, the casualties were so much. Overall casualties at the Battle of Antietam were 12,410 of the Union's about 69,000 soldiers and 13,724 of the Confederates, approximately 52,000 soldiers. So you could see when you put 12,410 and 13,724 together, that will tell you the casualties of this battle alone. And so if you estimate the Civil War and those who died in the US on this issue of slavery, then that will tell you how much slavery is important, or the relevance of it, that we are discussing it. And when we get to Russia and look at the selves, we will also see why important legislation will come, how Abraham Lincoln and others would also address the issue of slavery. Thank you. I think let me share another one. Let me look at is okay. Let's look at manifest destiny. Okay, so now yeah, manifest destiny. We want to understand what is manifest destiny, who propounded or who was the proponent of this destiny, and then what was the impact of this manifest destiny? Manifest destiny, anyway. So the idea that the United States, and more specifically the white Anglo-Saxon race, was destined to spread throughout the continent, was known as manifest destiny. Take note of this. You may meet it in the objectives. The idea that the US, and more specifically the white Anglo-Saxon race, were destined to spread throughout the continent, was what we refer to as manifest destiny in the 19th century. This was mostly used by Democrats to support the war with Mexico in the 1840s. The Whigs rejected the idea, and it was abandoned by the middle of the 19th century. Proponents of manifest destiny thought that the growth was not only wise, but also easily visible and unavoidable. Democrats tended to embrace the expansionist policies of the Polk administration by referring to manifest destiny as such. The idea of expansion was also supported by Whigs like Henry Clay, Daniel Webster, and Abraham Lincoln, who wanted to expand the nation's economy. John C. Calhoun was a notable Democrat who generally opposed his party on the issue, which fell out of favor by 1860. Now, manifest destiny was not a specific policy, but rather a generic idea. The phrase blended the expansionist viewpoint with other prevalent notions of the time, such as U.S. expansionism, U.S. exceptionalism, and romantic nationalism. While addressing manifest destiny, many authors have concentrated on U.S. expansionism. However, other authors interpret the term as a broader expression of a conviction in the U.S. purpose in the world, which has meant different things to different people over the years. For instance, U.S. political ideology is still influenced by the idea that the United States has a responsibility to advance and protect democracy around the globe, as espoused by Abraham Lincoln and Woodrow Wilson. Now, the coinage of the term manifest destiny. Yeah, so that is it. There are also claims that the phrase manifest destiny was first used by a journalist named John Sullivan in 1845 to describe the idea that because Americans and American institutions are morally superior, Americans are morally obligated to spread those institutions throughout the world in order to uplift less civilized societies like Native Americans, tribes, and the people of Mexico. And the people of Mexico, to liberate people in the Western Hemisphere from the rule of European monarchies. So, the Monroe Doctrine, which was enacted in 1823 and warned European nations that the U.S. would safeguard other countries of the Western Hemisphere against future colonization, was the closest America ever came to making manifest destiny official policy. By 1850, though the compromise was buckling under the weight of the nation's expansion in fulfillment of what some white men viewed as the country's manifest destiny, to take control of all the land from the east to California, slavery was always in contention in these plans. From expansion, and ironically took center stage in 1849, which California applied for statehood, though there was no mention of slavery in its constitution. In fact, the territory wanted to exclude African Americans altogether. At the time, there were 15 free states and 15 slave states, and admission of California as a free state would disturb the balance. So you see, there were both 15 free states and 15 slave states. And so that would mean that should California be admitted as a free state, then it will affect the balance of power. Now, would they granting, would disturb that balance, granting more power in Congress to free states because they had one more and they would win. New Mexico, a territory carved out of former Mexican lands, also signaled its intention to exclude slavery. Now, admission to statehood required congressional approval, but Southerners or Southern representatives feared complete loss of power. After months of debate, Congress agreed to another compromise, one that had been proposed by Henry Clay. The compromise included 4 consequential provisions. And let's look at these provisions. 1, California would enter the Union as a free state just as its citizens desired. 2. The remainder of the former Mexican territories would enter the Union under a plan of popular sovereignty, in which citizens within those states would decide whether to permit slavery or not. 3rd, the domestic slave trade would be abolished in the District of Columbia, though slavery there would continue. And 4th, Congress would enact a new and more stringent Fugitive Slave Act. The new Fugitive Slave Act provoked fury on the part of abolitionists and succeeded in recruiting more northern whites to the anti-slavery clause. So that is it. Now, the Constitution provided for the return of fugitive slaves, and Congress had enacted a fugitive slave law in 1793. But this new law galvanized anti-slavery sentiment. It allowed law enforcement officials to seize any suspected of being a fugitive and simply appear before a magistrate without any right to a trial by jury. So the accused had no right to testify in any hearing, and after presentation of evidence by the alleged owner, the magistrate could order the alleged fugitive returned to slavery. Further, and most importantly for white Northerners, the law provided punishment for any person who harbored or concealed a fugitive. Okay, so what were the impacts of Manifest Destiny on the Americans? How did it contribute to the American War? Okay, so by the time the Oregon issue was resolved, hello?
Yes, can you please throw more light on the fugitive? I'm not really getting it based on this context.
Can I throw more light on the fugitives?
Yes, please.
Yeah, so let me first of all find out your own understanding of fugitive. When you say fugitive, how do you understand it? So when you say fugitive, your common understanding of fugitive to me. How is it?
I'm looking at it like a slave that has been trying to free him or herself.
A slave that has
like trying to gain his or her own freedom when the slave masters has not granted him or her freedom.
yeah. So if you are trying to run away and you are caught, so you are trying to liberate yourself. Is that what you mean? Hello, can you hear me? I don't get you well.
I can hear. I am saying I understand it as a slave that is trying to gain his or her own freedom when the slave master has not granted him or her freedom.
I see. Okay, so can we have another view, or what another person to also talk? That's what I mean. Can you have another person to also talk?
So regard to the fugitive,
Yeah.
I think my understanding is a wanted man by the state who is trying to avoid trial.
A wanted man by the state who is trying to avoid trial.
Yeah.
I see. So in the context of okay, can we have another person? Yeah, please go on.
Hello.
Go on.
Okay. My understanding of a fugitive is someone who has committed a crime and the person is on the run.
Someone who has committed a crime and the person is on the run.
Yes, like the person has committed some form of a crime and he or she has been arrested. Then he has escaped.
And has escaped.
Yeah, so that's the person has escaped and he's wanted. He's on the wanted list.
Okay. I think you all have an idea about who a fugitive is. Yeah, and I also buy into what you are saying. So now, as the first speaker said, yeah, so they wanted to escape their status as slaves. They wanted to have that kind of freedom, and so they would escape, even though they have not, of course, granted that by their owners, and become free. Say, but of course they want to escape, and that is fugitive. Those who are trying to run away from their status as slaves, anyway. But that is it. There's more. You can read more on when I send the slides to you. You can read more on that. Um, yeah. So that's good. Now, uh, yeah, I was almost done with my this slide. Let me share. Oh, yeah, so I was on manifest. So as I was saying, the Constitution provided for the return of fugitive slaves, and Congress had enacted a fugitive slave law in 1793. But this new law governs anti-slavery sentiment. It allowed law enforcement officials to seize anyone suspected of being a fugitive and simply appear before a magistrate without any right to a trial by jury. So if you try to escape, you are stated as a slave and you were caught. Okay, so a fugitive, there was a fugitive. The law will deal with you. Okay, now the accused had no right to testify in any hearing, and after presentation of evidence by the alleged owner, the magistrate could order the alleged fugitive returned to slavery. So you could now go back to your status and be a slave. Further, and most importantly, for white northerners, the law provided punishment for any person who harbored or concealed a fugitive. If you kept someone who had run away, then the law will also it will deal with you. Now, impact of the manifest destiny. So manifest destiny is trying to say that the American had superior institutions and therefore they needed to let others have it. And I think it's even now, America now, this is also still there. And so by the time the Oregon issue was resolved, the US had declared war on Mexico. And as a result of manifest destiny and its desire to expand its borders, because they had to expand. So you see the effect of some of these things, theories. Now, when the Mexican-American War was finally put to an end in 1848 by the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, the U.S. gained an additional 525,000 square miles of land, comprising all or a portion of what is now California, Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico, Nevada, Utah, and Wyoming. Despite the lofty idealism of manifest destiny, the rapid territorial expansion over the first half of the 19th century resulted not only in a war with Mexico, but in the dislocation and brutal mistreatment of Native Americans, Hispanic, and other non-European occupants of the territories now being occupied by the U.S. So U.S. Expansion also fueled the growing debate over slavery by raising the present question of whether new states being admitted to the Union would allow slavery or not, a conflict that would eventually lead to a civil war. And that is what we looked at, slavery, whether they will allow slavery or not. So the issue of slavery in the North, and so we know the effect of manifest destiny in the coming of the American Civil War. Okay, I think I will end here. If you have any question, you can ask. Yeah, we have to end here for now. Questions? I think I've already forwarded this slides to you.
Yes, Doc.
Yes, sir.
Doc, please,
So you have all the slides.
impact and then
We can't
yes,
hear
Doc.
you.
It has left with the philosophy.
Ah, that's have the philosophy. Okay, you have the philosophy.
Yes,
I'll send.
please.
I will put all the philosophy together and forward them to you. So no problem.
Okay, Doc. So the impact and then the effect, are they the same?
Yeah, they are the same. Impact and effects. It could be negative or positive. They are all the same. So impact and effects are the same.
Okay, Doc.
Okay. Hello, doc. Hello, doctor.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much. This is Douglas. I'm a mentor.
Douglas.
I have some few questions.
Douglas, please, I can't hear you, please.
Yeah. Hello, doc. Please, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I think now it's okay.
Okay. So during the presentation, you made mention of Confederate soldiers and federal soldiers. Please, if you can give a distinction of the two. Then, secondly,
Your voice is very low. Your voice is very low. If you can talk a bit louder, I can't hear you well. Can you reposition yourself and talk? Go ahead.
Yeah, hello. Please, my
Yeah,
question was that during the presentation, you made mention of Confederate soldiers and federal soldiers, and I want to find out the difference between them. Then the indigenous of the Americans, I mean, the right owners of the American land before the coming of the Europeans, where are they? Because I think we should have their traces. Then the last one has to do with the course outlines. I'll be very grateful if you can share the course outlines with us, because we have the slides, but we don't have the course outline. When we have the course outline, it is going to guide us in our studies. Thank you very much.
The one I sent, I didn't add the course outlines to them, eh?
No, sir.
Oh, okay, we call the course outline. But I took you through the course outline, didn't I? I first of all took you through all the course outlines.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah, you took us through. But some of us, we were not seeing the screen that very much. So if you can share the course outline with us.
Yeah, so you see that we are not starting we are not looking at US. So we have stages. We have period that we are looking at. This one we are looking at US and Russia, where we are doing comparison. So we are actually interested in the slavery in US and the serfs in Russia. So we are not looking at the period of US history that will talk about the Native Americans, the Red Indians. No, or the founding of the America, the founding colony, the 13 founding colonies. Ojaja was the last, and so we are not starting from there. The colonies in the south, those in the middle, that will be colonialism, nation building, and independence in the USA. It's a course on its own that we teach. So this phase that we are doing, Mr. Douglas, I don't know whether you did history at, okay, you have not, but we are not teaching you all the history courses. There are some major courses that we teach those who are doing BA. You understand? Doing BA. And the BA are students, but those who are doing BEd, we teach them some of these things that they need. But the BA students, not the colonialism in the US, where we take them to the details. And that's why we talk about the founding of the states. And I even I will look at US as the colony of Great Britain or America as a colony of Britain. And then we look at the American War of Revolution or American, and we do all that in the states. And so later we'll look at those things. But of course, I mean, if you want to have an idea, so the Federalist era, the Confederate era, so all those things are not part of this. That's why you are confused. You see, we are started from somewhere. Yeah, just giving you an idea about slavery, but we need to give you an idea about the states there, all the states. So you have them: Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, Virginia, South Carolina, North Carolina. We can continue. We can mention, go ahead and mention up to get to Georgia for the last of the founding states of the U.S., the 13 original founding states. Now they are more, they are about 50 something. But you could see that at first there were 30 founding states of the US. And so you go there to a time that, so they declared their independence and these people and so and so forth. So, we have a lot. If you say you're going to go there, so I would say that some of these things, you can just go online, go them, and then be conversant with some of these issues. Because otherwise, if you say you're going to go there, I'm afraid we are only chipping in, looking at it. So we want to see what happened, the issue of slavery causing even a civil war, and the idea we are choosing for manifest destiny. What was it? It was being popular, and how it also its impact on the civil war, the coming of the civil war. Why the North and the South, the issue of slavery. Some supported, others did not support, and all that. But of course, you see the parties that were there, and some of them. So the part they took, and all that. So I think I'm trying to uh, give you an overview of the whole thing. Unless maybe at appropriate time we need to walk you through the phase of the U.S. history. But that one a lot is so loaded, and unfortunately we are not teaching you on that part, that period of the U.S. history. We need to walk you through so that you know when they gain independence. Yeah, when America gained its independence from Great Britain, we look at the causes of the American War of Independence or the American Revolution, and when they gain independence, so the presidents, George Washington and co. So you look at the first president, the first three presidents, or the president of the U.S. and a lot too for U.S. history. They are even their constitution, the Declaration of Human Rights, and all that. But as I said, it's not part of what we are supposed to teach you. This is short time, about 4 weeks lecture, that's going to help you to compare. So there will be still lacuna as far as some of these things are concerned, because you might have read history, but we can also say that we are teaching you all these things. These are not part of the course that you are doing anyway. So some of these things, because we are giving you this, taking you through, giving you or providing historical insight, you'll be able to, at least on your own, go there now. Because of internet, you can just go there, Google some of these things, have an idea about that, your own time, so that you understand certain things that we have not even taught you. I think I will end here. If any question is there, you can ask. If not, then I will end here, and then we'll have to meet again. We'll be meeting because the time of the things are loaded. We need to walk you through. But after all, it's not for us. Whatever we end is where we'll do. But I want you to have more, to walk you through most of the content so that you'll be well grounded, and not that you have done the course and sometimes want to ask you something that you don't know. They should still be very important. This course is 2-in-1. We are looking at US, and at the same time we look at Russia. So we need to move very fast. And it's very unfortunate that on Sunday the internet failed where I went. I went into all my laptop and internet connectivity, my router and all, but unfortunately, not knowing there was no even network there. So all things became fiasco. But I think we'll still make progress and catch up and finish on the right time. In the time that we have more time for ourselves, wrap things up. And that's why I give you simple slides. Okay, so I think I will end here, and we shall continue later.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Unless there's another question from Michael Finn. Okay, Michael is thinking about the question to ask next time. Justice Anna,
I was just thanking you.
Are you here? Mr. Justice Anna, are you here? Mr. Justice Anna, are you here?
Doc.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much.
Hello. Thank you very much, Doc.
Okay, so we'll end here. Enjoy the rest of the day. We shall meet next time. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time and everything. Bye bye. Bye bye.